Amazing how people cover this stuff up. Like, I don't know if you followed the grooming gang stories from the UK, but basically we had a situation for decades where young girls were being abused in the thousands, potentially 500,000, and it was covered up because
I'm not aware of this at all.
Well, right. So what happened was it was basically people from a certain background. It was what we call it in the UK South Asian, so Bangladeshi and Pakistani mostly, and they were abusing Sikh and local British white girls in the hundreds of thousands. We had one of the victims on our show, Dr. Ella Hill, a very brave woman. And it was covered up for decades because, and we've just had a report come out to try and find out why it was covered up, why it wasn't investigated, because these people went to the police and they were told there's nothing we can do for you.
Oh my God!
Yeah, and it wasn't investigated and wasn't reported on properly because of, quote, sensitivities about race. Right. So all this stuff gets covered up for all kinds of it's mind blowing, man, what people get away with. On this sort of thing.
Because the politicians who should have been exposing it, the people who should have been talking about it, the police who should have been investigated, were worried about being labelled racist. In fact, one famous tweet from a Labour MP told some of these people to shut up for the sake of diversity.
She retweeted a tweet that said that,
retweeted it. My apologies.
Shut up for the sake of diversity. These are rape victims, Joe, and some of them were murdered.
Oh my God.
And not just rape victims as well, kids. Underage kids.
Yeah. And you haven't heard about it because...
At all.
Right.
It's massively taboo. Yeah. Even to talk about in polite society gets, people feel very uncomfortable talking about this because it comes from communities like, what you would say like Asian communities and particularly white working class girls and Sikh girls. So people feel very uncomfortable about this. They're far more comfortable talking about Epstein because in their heads it's punching up. Right. Whilst if you talk about this crime, it's seen, as punching down, that it's racist, and it's far easier for them to silence it. But the problem is, Joe, is when you do that, what happens is that nefarious people can then get involved in this, and they say these words, they're not representing you. Look what's going on. If the powers that be aren't going to represent you, I will. And that's when things start to take an ugly turn. Yeah. We need to be able to talk about these subjects. It doesn't matter how uncomfortable they are. It doesn't matter how difficult they are. It doesn't matter how awkward they make us feel. Because we had a great guest on the show called Ed West, and he made one of the most profound points I've ever heard on our show, which is, if you are not prepared to talk about a subject honestly, then you are never going to find a solution to that subject.
To that problem. And what happened was when we got one of the victims on our show, Dr. Ella Hill, I remember because we were trying to get the Member of Parliament, who was one of the women that started to expose this. She wrote an article in one of the newspapers, and she got so much hate that she didn't want to talk about it anymore. So when we called her up and we said, do you want to come on the show and tell us about this? She said, I just can't do it. And that's when I remember sitting in the car talking to Francis on the phone, and I went, we've got to a point where a Member of Parliament whose job it is to protect these children is getting so much hate for speaking out about it, she doesn't want to talk about it anymore. A Member of Parliament.
So this woman who's the doctor, she was presumably molested when she was young?
Yes.
So how long has this been going on?
Decades.
This has been decades. It's been going on since the 90s.
Yeah.
So a lot of these people now are like my age, in their 40s, and it's still going on.
And how do they have access to these girls? Like, what is...
They would basically prey on vulnerable girls. Maybe they didn't have a parent, or maybe they something like that. They ply them with alcohol, drugs, get them addicted. And when some of the families tried to go and take their kids back, the police, I can't remember the exact details, but it was, in several cases it was like, she's just a prostitute. And the father would get arrested for trying to get his daughter out of that situation.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, man.
For the sake of diversity.
Yeah. That's what some people... Look, not everybody was doing that. I think most people were just afraid because of the racial component. Yeah. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and this is why... Sorry, Francis. Yeah. This is why this identity politics is such a problem, because when you stop treating people as individuals who behave correctly or incorrectly, lawfully, unlawfully, you start to go, well, these people can't commit a crime anymore. Right? And these people commit a crime by just being whatever. That's a problem. We got to get back to the MLK idea of everybody being judged by the content of their character.
Were we ever there?
I don't know. We were trying
to get back to it. Get back to the idea.
You're right. It's a good point that you picked me up on it. What I mean is we got to get back to trying to get there.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's what we got to get back to. The idea that that's the dream.
Right.
And we'll probably never get there because we're human beings. We're not perfect, right?
That's one of the most disturbing aspects of like this hardcore left progressivism is that they are willing to ignore reality for the sake of this narrative that they have. And also they're willing to make these mass generalizations and lump everyone like particularly if they're hard to defend, like straight white men, like that's a great one. That's an awesome scapegoat. You can toss that into there. Wealthy people, you know, upper class people with money. It's just a very bizarre thing that's